And as the Iran war continues to raise oil prices and disrupt global supply routes, Indonesia is once again confronting the costs of its dependence on fossil fuels. From today, the Indonesian government is rolling out a series of measures to protect its fuel supply and domestic energy market. But will they work? Let's go live now to Jakarta, where I'm joined by Putra Adhiguna from the Energy Shift Institute. Putra, good to have you with us. Firstly, can you talk us through what sort of measures the Indonesian government is looking at and what it's already imposed, in this era of high energy costs driven by the war in the Middle East?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I think some of the key things that Indonesia is about to implement, firstly, is implementing the work from home, reducing the work weekdays by at least 1 day. It's going to begin with the public, government employees first, and it's probably going to extend into the wider sector. Secondly, it's also trying to limit some of the distribution of subsidized fuel. This will probably happen in stages. And as well, there's a few other policies, including, increased adoption of biofuel, basically all kinds of resilience action. So a lot of these are in the pipeline, and I think the government has just announced the plans just yesterday.
Yes, of course, Indonesia is a producer of oil, but what can you tell us, what do we know about the supply situation in Indonesia as of now? Is there enough fuel going about?
So Indonesia is a major importer of oil. It imports actually about 60% more than on oil consumption, which means that it's quite reliant on imports. Now, its Middle East reliance is not as high as other countries. It only imports about a quarter of its imported supply from Middle East. But then the price exposure, it's already there. So far, the government has been restraining from increasing any fuel price domestically, whether subsidized and unsubsidized. So those plans are in the pipeline, but the government has not been doing it so far. So supply-wise, we're relying on import, but I think the exposure right now is more on the price side.
Yes, of course, the longer that this war drags on, is there concern, there will undoubtedly be concerns for supply. Will there be more drastic measures? Because I'm wondering whether at some point rationing comes into place.
I believe it's probably going to come. And of course, being a political leadership is never an easy time to kind of navigate the situation. On one hand, you need to calm the public. On the other, you need to kind of scramble for options. So I think limiting the distribution of fuel will probably going to come, especially like you said, we're reaching the 4th weeks of the crisis, which means that tankers that's supposed to be arriving in places like Indonesia is probably arriving. So it's really, we're starting to feel the pressure as we speak right now. Again, the government is also spending a lot of money for subsidizing. At least an extra $30 million a day is being spent in terms of subsidies. And obviously, the fiscal space will be limited.
Yes, I was going to ask you about those subsidies. I mean, the higher the price, the global price of petrol is, and the more Indonesia has to pay for it. But is it a wise decision to keep the prices low for now? And how long can it sustain? Can these subsidies sustain? Because presumably, Indonesia is spending more, like you said, on subsidies at the moment.
I don't believe that there is any sustainable plan to subsidize it, but I think the government just trying to avoid panic buying. If we look at what's happening in other countries, actually doing it in phases may be more preferable. But I'm sure there's a political calculus behind this, trying to avoid panic within the market. I don't believe that it can sustain the subsidies for much longer. And like you said, the longer the conflict goes, the fiscal pressure will increase. So it wouldn't be surprising to see a phased-in approach in increasing fuel price as well as limiting more distributions.
Yes, and I'm also wondering with Indonesia, I mean, its budget position is going to take a hit. Will that impact on some of its bigger public services? Will we see cuts to public services? For instance, the free meals program.
Now, the signal has been starting to emerge. Just yesterday, the government already started saying, we want to do more optimizations in some of these budgets. Now, how this will be realized remains to be seen, because ultimately, if you're spending $30 million a day, even other budgets may not be sufficient. But I think it's a good signal that the president is willing to open that discussion, even on the flagship program by the president, to kind of revisit and how do you optimize that. So I think it's already happening behind the screen as we speak.
Yes, and is there a sense as well that President Prabowo has done enough to, ensure that fuel supplies do continue at a level where it's not going to put too much strain on the nation as a whole, but also the government's budget?
I don't think there is an easy solution out of this, just like in many other countries. So really, we need to look at more on the short term as well as the longer term, going electrics and other things like that. But in the short term, as we know, there is really no easy solutions. We're scrambling for the same tankers that everybody's looking for, including Australia. So again, there's no solution. There is some plan for diversifications, but we're probably going to have to take quite a bit of a hit as well.
Yes, and can you tell us, Putra, how is Indonesia going with a transition to some degree, at least, towards electrification, towards renewable energy?
On electrification, there's actually a good signal that the sales of new vehicles has reached at least 10% within the last year. So that's a good signal. Now, of course, many of them are Chinese EV imports, which is probably not sustainable for the long run. People need to kind of make factories domestically. In terms of renewables, this is where the progress is a bit slow. Indonesia is progressing, but it's not as fast as it can be compared to its neighbors, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. So I think there's still quite a lot of homework. On a positive note, we're seeing signals coming from the palace and the president, basically mentioning over and over again about the importance of going electric. So there may be possibilities of more policy support. And the president just came back from Tokyo just the other day, which basically also mentioned there needs to be more investment in renewables. So we're seeing the political signal. Now we need to see whether it can endure during the crisis and after the crisis subsides.
Okay, Putra Adhiguna from the Energy Shift Institute. Thanks very much for giving us your insights there from Jakarta.
Thank you.